Hi, hello. We're getting into our top 10 now. Looking at the next five series, starting off with Zombieland Saga. If you haven't heard of this show, if you don't know what it's about, I really recommend pausing this now and checking out the first episode. Even this image that I've chosen spoils maybe a little too much, but as it dawns on you what the actual concept of the show is, it's one of the best, not even twists, but just this like growing sense of nightmarish energy that you're like, it can't possibly be this. It can't actually be. Are you ready for it? This is your last chance to pause and skip or whatever. But this is a zombie idol show. It's about a group of girls who are zombies. They've been revived from the dead, and they've been enlisted by a shouting all the time producer to represent the prefecture of Saga, to become local idols, to do PR and stuff, and to save Saga. Uh huh. They really made an anime about that. And it's great. It's great, and it's really miraculously great too. Like it has to succeed on so many levels simultaneously. It has to be a good comedy. Like so much of the show is based around the absurdity of the content, about just how far they have to go to hide their zombie identity from people and all of the insane mishaps where things become evident when people's heads fall off and what have you. Um, and if like this sort of fell flat, if they weren't able to make these sort of jokes funny, if they weren't able to make uh, the producer funny when he shouts at them and demands they do these ridiculous things, there would be absolutely no point to the show. But at the same time, when it goes the exact opposite direction and actually does some fairly played straight horror elements, it's not that often, but it has to succeed on there too. Um, Plus, this whole time it's also an idol show, which has its own kind of host of requirements, namely that the performances have to be exciting, the songs have to be good, you have to care about their success as a team and feel invested into their progression and development. And it really succeeds there too. This is probably the most invested I've been in an idol franchise in a long time. This they're able to like really sell the idea of just how much struggling, just how much suffering there is involved to make it as far as they do, which is kind of difficult to do in an idol show without it being really depressing, without it just feeling really harsh and unhappy and unpleasant. But here they're able to marry like the most distressing elements with the most comedic elements, and it turns out really well. Also, kind of a requisite of idol shows is that you kind of get back into the past, you do the origin story of all the characters, and here that's even more exciting because since they're zombies, they've all been revived from like different areas and different occupations and stuff. And they do a really great job kind of like contrasting the idol culture of some of the older girls, contrasting like different show business perspectives with each other, contrasting people that are just civilians with those in the entertainment industry. They're able to use these backstories to really bring out these thematic issues, which are actually quite interesting, just like in and of themselves, but wrapped in this super entertaining, super surreal zombie idol package. It becomes really enthralling. And the performances, I alluded to this earlier, but the performances in the show are like super hype. Um, the first two episodes are brilliant in their multi-genre approach. And when episode three came around, me and a lot of my friends were extremely disappointed that it went to like kind of more generic idol music and that they switched to 3D CG dancing in the performances, which is usually a sign of real lazy phoning it in type behavior. But since that point, they really go to some pretty extreme lengths in the performances, and even though they're still using like the CG and they're still using fairly generic idol music, they really do some pretty amazing things, some pretty jaw-dropping sequences. So I think it succeeds with flying colors on that mark too. So yeah, it's the show that has a little bit of everything, and in the end too, this is the most miraculous part, is that it does actually seem to be promoting Saga. I don't know much about Saga as a prefecture, but occasionally they'll talk about locations and talk about delicacies and stuff, and it's like, oh, those are probably real things. It's actually probably going to increase the tourist population in Saga, in this the most ill-conceived, least likely to succeed scheme ever, an anime about zombie idols. I really hope this gets a second season. They've certainly left the door open for a second season. By the end of it, I was extremely emotionally invested, and I did not want it to end. I just wanted to keep seeing these characters, which I had grown to love so well. So yeah, great show. I really hope we see more of it. Then we have this, another show that it's pretty bizarre that it exists. So this is a adaptation of a spin-off, a prequel spin-off to the manga series Kaiji by Fukumoto, who you might know as also the author of Akagi and all of these other crazy gambling mangas. So this preview stars Tonegawa, who at one point is like Kaiji's opponent in Kaiji. He's the second command of like kind of the big evil empire that Kaiji is battling against in one form or another throughout the entire series. And the premise here is that we see behind the scenes and see how these ridiculous gambles are set up, which to me is like a great premise. I think that's hilarious that Fukumoto kind of acknowledges just how extreme and logistically nightmarish some of the scenarios that he writes about are, and has actually decided to explore just how it would go down if people actually tried to pull these things off. And the beginning of the show focuses on that, and it's great. And there's a great moment of satisfaction when they make progress on these projects. But more and more, it just starts kind of spiraling out of control and going to more bizarre and episodic adventures. And I wouldn't have expected that I liked it as much as I did. It's hilarious, but it's hard to really pin down what the source of the comedy is. In many ways, this is like the purest definition of sitcom, in that it's just comedic situations. There's not so many jokes as there are just kind of a flurry of circumstances that leads to someone in some ridiculous position, and Tonegawa probably like covering his face in frustration and shame. Um, it does have some kind of more external sources of humor, I guess I would say. There's the narrator, whom I really love. I want to make a compilation of all of the English phrases that he shouts out. There's a lot of kind of really on-the-nose, like, business humor, where they're talking about, like, the PowerPoints and the corporate Twitter account and stuff, and those seem like very targeted towards businessmen and stuff. There's a nice sense of realism, that it's giving voice to the actual things that businessmen complain about in modern Japanese companies. That's a lot of fun, and I think it's like... I don't know. Okay, so at first I was baffled that this show existed. It had been quite a while since Madhouse had adapted any Fukumoto properties. I didn't think we had any hope of seeing them ever again, given that Madhouse had kind of gone on to like bigger things, I would say. Fukumoto manga is pretty niche, and yet they're not only adapting one, but they're adapting this spin-off, which I was aware of it because a few chapters had been scanlated, but it wasn't an active scanlation. I wouldn't have thought it was popular at all. But when I went to Japan, it was actually like everywhere. Like in all the manga stores I went to, there was a Tonegawa display. So I think this is actually kind of a runaway hit for Fukumoto. People really like seeing this kind of more down-to-earth and yet also wackier scenarios. Just that kind of situational comedy aspect. But of course, because it's Fukumoto, there's also pretty heartwarming moments. There's some moments where you actually see what a complex character Tonegawa has built up to be. There's one where he goes back to his high school reunion that I think is really touching in a lot of ways. I don't know. It's still pretty crazy that they made this, and that it's a two-core as well. Where things start getting really strange is after we've had all sorts of adventures with Tonegawa and the black suits, the episodes start being interwoven quite frequently with episodes about Otsuki, who's another former Kaiji villain. He was the foreman in the underground gambling arena that Kaiji was trapped in, or the underground labor camp where Otsuki ran an underground gambling arena. Anyways, so the premise is that they're all trapped in this underground work camp, but with enough money, like with enough Tei bucks, which is like the currency of the work camp, you can buy a one-day pass to go back out to the outside. So these Otsuki stories cover his one-day excursions. And they're very, very mundane slice of life normally. It's just kind of like him going to certain stores, doing certain activities, a lot of focus on like food, a lot of focus on good ways to enjoy food, like little kind of life hacks and tips and stuff. And I was like baffled that this was being animated by such a high profile company like Madhouse, just that it existed in the first place. And I wasn't really sure what the source was either. I thought maybe these were just chapters of the Tonegawa manga that just randomly swapped focus. But when I went to Japan, I saw that there's actually a full parallel series about Otsuki. It's another complete spin-off in and of itself, which has like 5 volumes now already. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And I enjoyed them, you know, that all sounds up my alley, right? Like slice of life, wonderment at normal things. This kind of idea of a self-excluding paradise that I've hinted at before of slice of life, where you just kind of remove the elements of anxiety that lock you into yourself and start to experience things kind of as they really are. It came across with that like beautifully. But it wasn't until this one episode, which is about Otsuki wanting to go to this board game cafe with his friend, but he catches a cold. So he uses all these home remedies to try to make himself well in time that he can still go to the board cafe. And it hit me that Otsuki is Fukumoto. That all of these little life hacks, these home remedies, the Otsuki roll where he tucks himself in while still lying underneath the blankets, these are all things that Fukumoto does. And I started thinking about it, like Fukumoto will write these insane, passionate characters like Kaiji, Akagi, Zero, Washizu. But it's hard to imagine that Fukumoto himself is like any of those people. He admires that sort of person. He's very fascinated by that sort of person, but it's pretty clear to me that those aren't Fukumoto. The only times that like we've seen a mangaka, like you can't picture any of those people writing manga, right? The only person who writes manga in a Fukumoto property that I'm aware of is Mihoko. Is that her name? What's his face's daughter? That's always trying to get with Kaiji. Um, like, I realized maybe Otsuki is how Fukumoto sees himself. Like, think about it. Think about the number of series that Fukumoto puts out. He's got Tonegawa and Otsuki, these 2 Kaiji spin-offs, plus Kaiji itself. There's the new Kurosawa. He writes and draws all 4 of those, which I'm pretty sure are all running in parallel. He also writes and contributes in probably other ways to Washizu, Hero, the Kurosawa spin-off Legend of Nakane. I'm not sure what the status is of Zero. I think Zero is on hiatus, but he writes and draws that when it's out. So that's like... Oh, and Fukumoto All-Stars, I think he's involved with that. There's probably other ones that I don't even know about. So that's... what, like 8 series that I can think of around there that he's involved in. Most of them come out every month. That is a busy schedule. So perhaps does he see himself similar as Otsuki, toiling away in this underground labor camp, writing and drawing manga nonstop. And then just every once in a while, once in a blue moon, he gets a day of freedom where he just reemerges into normal Tokyo society and can do such novel things as just going to restaurants or getting a drink or going to a festival. Is this the analogy we're seeing here? I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit. Maybe I'm assuming things that aren't true. But once I realized that, the Otsuki segments took on a whole nother level of heartwarmingness and beauty. So yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty great show. I'm so thrilled that it exists. It's also kind of cool too that this is the first Fukumoto manga I've watched without also having read a lot of the manga, or first anime I've watched without having read a lot of the manga. So it's kind of fun to like reverse engineer it and try to imagine what the manga would look like just based on what I'm watching in the anime. That's a lot of fun too. It's not an experience I get too often. Usually I don't go in that direction. Ha ha ha. So yeah, nice show. Check it out. I think not everybody is gonna like it, but if you're the type to like it, you'll probably love it. Next we have Hisone to Masotan. So earlier I talked about Darling in the Franxx and how I was so sure that it was the next Evangelion that I started freaking out and embarrassed myself. Well, this is really the next Evangelion, and I watched the whole thing, so I can say that with confidence. It's also the new Nichijou, and you can probably tell just from the screenshot. There's a superficial overlap in the art styles, but beyond that, it has the same sort of humor I think as Nichijou, the same sort of kind of easygoing and yet frantic pace, the same liveliness of character animation, which is saying a whole lot, given that Nichijou, in terms of kind of comedic animation, I think is still Kyoani's high point. Kyoani's high point. And Hisone to Masotan Hisamaso really captures a lot of that same spirit and that same energy in its animation. But it's also Evangelion. It nails that thing that I think Darling in the Franxx failed at, which is the second layer, that in the character interactions and learning about the characters and learning about the plot of the show, the significance of what they're doing. It isn't just the action, it isn't just the comedy. There's something lurking underneath it that you can't quite detect, that could cast everything you're witnessing into kind of like a darker, grim tone. And I think it really makes good on that promise, that kind of just whispered promise that you pick up on early. It's like, oh, things aren't quite what they seem. The show about riding around in the guts of a dragon might actually be a little stranger even than that. Um, yeah, it's a really lovely show. There's some very beautiful moments of flying around and the sky and some really nice work done on like the transforming dragons and the work of the fighter jets and stuff. I remember when I first heard about this show, I watched a trailer of it, and the trailer showed just like a little bit of animation of the fighter jet moving, and I was like, this is going to be a good show. I knew just from that. The amount of passion they put into something like that really reflects the fact that they've got a whole bunch of nerds on the staff, basically. And once you can see passion in the smallest details like that, you know that the whole show isn't going to be lacking in any sort of substance. So yeah, I'm just so impressed that this show lived up to the lofty expectations I put on it from basically the first second. Darling in the Franxx crumbled under the weight of my frankly unreasonable hype, but Hisomaso soars on. So yeah, check it out. I think far too few people watch this show, so don't be a hater. A hater. Don't miss out. Hater is a bit harsh. Alright, what do we got next? This is a lovely show. Oh, it's crazy that this is 7th. It's crazy that there's 6 other shows that I ended up liking more than this. Because when this was airing, let me tell you, I was I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by positive feelings towards it. It made me cry like almost every episode. So this is Antarctica Girls. Sore yori mo to basho. About to yi basho. About four girls that want to go to Antarctica. I don't want to get too much into like the plot specifics and stuff because even though it's not like big twists or big spoilers, they really do a good job of doling out animation or information, really kind of making you feel the significance of the character development that happens. Um, it's like kind of slice of life. At first, I thought it was going to be they get to Antarctica almost immediately, and then we're going to get 10 episodes of wacky slice of life hijinks in Antarctica. It's not quite that. Although there is just enough that kind of each stage of the development of the adventure, they do spend some time just kind of showing the lifestyle that they've achieved, the way it would be to live out the entirety of this journey. So that's really nice, and that's married perfectly with this like really nice adventurous storytelling. More than a slice of life series, this is like an adventure story. And even though it doesn't have a lot of like physical action and no, actually there are quite a few like chase scenes and stuff. um, it has a sense of adventurousness and wonder that I think would appeal to like really anyone. Like I hope people aren't turned off at all by the relatively mundane premise. Is it mundane? They're going to Antarctica. Come on. But yeah, just because there's no transforming robots or swords or whatever, doesn't mean that this isn't an exciting, fast-paced, suspenseful show. The animation is beautiful too. Uh, Really great character animation, a lot of attention to detail of characters' personalities coming through in the way that they're animated. This is something I've talked about with pretty much every show we've praised so far, so I hope you understand that it's a big deal to me. Just moments where the animator, you can tell they've thought a lot about how the character really is as a person and how they would really act, not just in terms of what they would say or what they would do, but in the little idiosyncrasies of their movements, the little gestures they would make. Those things can really shine through in an anime and really make it something much more special than it would be without. The direction is also fantastic. Every scene has kind of like a cinematic impact. And I talk a lot about like sequence-based directing. So what I mean by that is you can either kind of like direct shot by shot, where you think, okay, in this shot, you know, she's talking to her, how do we want to frame it? How are we going to marry like what's being said with how the characters act, with the backgrounds, with the lighting, blah, blah, blah. So you can think of that either on like a shot-by-shot basis or like a scene-by-scene basis, a scene being like maybe the back and forth of this entire conversation, or an entire sequence where you're thinking about, okay, this is the scene where they're out doing their like practice camping. They've been moving around for quite a few hours, and now they finally come to this really beautiful sunrise, and they're just having like a moment to celebrate. And sequence-based directing, which I normally associate with films, is to look at that entire like little emotional arc and to pick everything, every minutia about every shot on a large arc of emotion. Did I just repeat myself in a way that made this confusing? To make an entire smooth arc from start to finish of the kind of plot chunk, such that at the end, when they see the sunset, these shots are working off of the anticipation that they know has been built up through the entire sequence, working off the emotional state that they're confident you've been put in. It's a lot harder than scene-based direction or shot-based direction, and it kind of relies upon itself that every scene up until this point, you know you have to have done well. You have to have like confidence for this payoff. But I think the rewards speak for themselves. The show becomes so much more enthralling this way than any other kind of more broken down conceptualization of it. And this show, like, they do a lot of kind of almost genre parody stuff. There's a scene really early on where she's trying to figure out how she can tell her mom that she wants to go to Antarctica, and suddenly everything is cast in this like kind of thriller, horrific light where the mom looks like she's gonna kill her, and it's like understanding that you can weave that sort of feeling into every aspect of the direction. I think is what really sells this. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's great. It's so great. There's also like a few things that they did that went a little further than I think they've been done in most anime. There's a couple kind of like archetypical characters and archetypical plot points that we have seen like a few hundred times probably, but they're really willing and really deserve like they've earned this idea that they can just go a step further with it. And I don't want to spoil what I'm talking about with that, but there's a few scenes that I think probably will shock you, especially if you are a big anime fan. You know what I mean? Like it plays on your expectations really well. So yeah, fantastic show. I'm really happy with it. Really a great triumphant story. And the last one we'll talk about in this video is haha Shoujo Kakagi Review Starlight. The Stage Girls story. Again, this is another one where I don't really want to say too much if you haven't watched it. And I'll give you an opportunity right now to pause and go watch the first episode before I give major conceptual spoilers. Okay, so this is exactly what it looks like from episode 1. The girls go and perform on stage, and then there's like a kind of underworld where they're having these combat editions, which kind of has the trappings of a magical girl show. There's like an awesome transformation sequence and such, and the idea of like magical girl versus magical girl is now becoming as established as a genre as like team of magical girls versus monsters. So that's not surprising either. It's more like about the small things that the show does so well, and a lot of them are in the aesthetics that make it so unique and cool. So all of the battles, since they are happening on stage and they're part of this audition project, they only have practical effects, and they go out of their way to show that when there's like smoke, it's a smoke machine, and when there's like pillars and staircases rising out of the stage, they show like the counterweights and the pulley mechanisms and stuff. I think that's so cool. Like, it's not the biggest deal, and the fact that like they sing while they fight, and they have these tons and tons of insert songs that tell parts of the story. It's just fantastic. Like, I don't know. They really did it. For the first time ever, they were able to have this concept of like one half slice of life, and then the other half the issues that were raised during the slice of life portion being fought out in actual combat. So many shows have tried that and just made a mess of it. Like Black Rock Shooter comes to mind instantly. It just got like way overloaded and complicated when really that should be like the simplest premise imaginable. And the plot of this show does get pretty complicated. It kind of falls into a lot of the trappings of like mysterious shows with vague supernatural elements, and I don't want to spoil too much, but it never loses the significance of what's happening. And this is what I think is so important about these shows. And they do a great job with the auditions and the idea of like rankings and who's going to get the top part, who's currently ranked highest. That's a really good way to never lose the hype and excitement about what you're watching. You never want the audience to be going like, huh? Like, why does this matter? They can be confused as to what's happening. They can be confused as to how things are going to turn out, or like even characters' motivations and stuff. They do a lot of really good stuff around kind of not really being sure why people are behaving this way towards each other. All of that sort of tension is fine, but as long as they actually maintain the tension and the desire to know, and it's not just like, what? Like, which is my big problem with like Black Rock Shooter or whatever. By the end, I wasn't going like, whoa, what? But like, huh? Um, the stuff that happens outside of the battles too, I was blown away by the direction in some of the scenes. There's an early episode where it shows Karen and Hikari, our two main characters, talking on the phone to each other, and the way it was shot with not ever seeing like a complete question answer pair, but just seeing like little slices of their conversation that you're able to extrapolate from like what question they must be responding to or what the previous answer was or whatever. I was just so enchanted by it. I had never seen something like that shot like this. And as they just move around independently through these like really beautiful backgrounds, the background work in the show, just in general, is head and shoulders above kind of like the lowest tier anime. I think that's something that people overlook sometimes is like, just pick any random shot of like a character's room or like an outdoor suburban street or something and just kind of look at the detail. Look at the little things that they chose to include just to give it a little more personality. And all of this is like totally unnecessary, but I think it adds so much to the show. So yeah, I don't know. The action sequence is great. Giraffe, great. Significance sometimes confusing, but always the magnitude of that significance apparent. I don't know what else to say. They really did it. For so long, I wanted a show like this. Half slice of life, half the hype ass battle scenes, and we finally got it. We finally did it. So yeah, again, check it out. 5 shows remain. Can you guess what they are? Not any of these. These were already here. Not any of these. We already talked about all these. Alright. We'll have to tune in tomorrow to find out.